October 2023. Lockheed Martin's chief of international sales submitted his resignation after 23 years with the company. No explanation given publicly, but defense industry insiders knew exactly why. 1 week earlier, Czech Republic, a NATO member, close U.S. ally, and priority F-35 target customer, announced they were buying Swedish Gripens instead. That decision cost Lockheed Martin $4.2 billion in lost revenue over the contract lifetime. But the resignation wasn't about one lost sale. It was about what that sale represented. Czech Republic became the 7th country in 9 years to evaluate F-35 and choose Gripen. 7 countries. 7 rejections, and each one making the same calculation. F-35 costs too much for what we actually need. Here's why that pattern creates panic at Lockheed Martin headquarters. It's not just about losing 7 customers. It's about the next 10 countries watching those 7 and asking, if NATO members are choosing Gripen, why shouldn't we? Brazil chose Gripen in 2014. Skeptics called it political anomaly. South American politics, not replicable. Czech Republic chose Gripen in 2023. That excuse collapsed. NATO member faces Russian threat, full access to U.S. systems, chose Gripen anyway. Now it's a pattern, and patterns become trends. Trends become landslides. Welcome to the Gripen Domino effect, the existential threat Lockheed Martin won't acknowledge publicly, but is desperately fighting privately, because their entire F-35 export business model, $400 billion in potential sales over 40 years, depends on countries believing F-35 is inevitable. 7 dominoes have fallen. The 8th is Canada, 88 fighters, $19 billion at stake. And if Canada falls, the avalanche begins. The $400 billion economics nobody understands. Let me explain why Lockheed Martin executives are actually panicking. Because this isn't just about losing customers. This is about the F-35 program's survival. F-35 development cost, $1.7 trillion over program lifetime. That's research, development, testing, deployment, and sustainment. How does Lockheed Martin make that investment profitable? Production volume. The more F-35s built, the lower per unit costs become. Lower costs mean more countries can afford it. More customers mean more production. The cycle continues. Current plan, 3,000 plus F-35s total. U.S. military, 2,500 aircraft. International customers, 500 plus aircraft. But here's the death spiral scenario. If international sales collapse, production volumes drop. Lower volumes mean higher per unit costs. Higher costs make F-35 even less competitive. Fewer countries buy. Production drops further. Costs rise more. This is why every lost sale matters catastrophically. Czech Republic choosing Gripen doesn't just cost Lockheed Martin $4.2 billion. It proves to every other country that alternatives exist, that F-35 isn't inevitable, that you can choose differently without consequence. And once that mindset spreads, the entire export model collapses. The 7 countries that broke the myth. Now let me show you exactly which 7 countries rejected F-35 for Gripen, because this list reveals why Lockheed Martin's resignation letter was probably brief. Brazil, 2014. The first crack FX-2 fighter program. 4 candidates. F-35, Gripen, Rafale, Super Hornet. Winner, Gripen E, 36 aircraft, $5.4 billion. Brazil's reasoning, technology transfer, domestic manufacturing, independence from U.S. control. Lockheed Martin's response, political anomaly, not relevant to serious allies. Czech Republic, 2023. The pattern confirmed NATO member, borders hostile territory, full U.S. access, should have been guaranteed F-35 customer. Chose Gripen anyway. 24 aircraft, $5.6 billion total, including 30-year support. This was the decision that destroyed Lockheed Martin's anomaly argument. If NATO members facing Russia choose Gripen, the pattern is undeniable. Thailand, Colombia, Hungary, Argentina. The acceleration Thailand, 12 Gripens, 2008, expanded to 16, 2025, never considered returning to U.S. fighters. Colombia, 18 Gripens, 2025, evaluated F-35, chose Gripen, cost and independence won. Hungary, leased 14 Gripens since 2006, now buying them permanently instead of upgrading to F-35. Argentina, negotiating used Gripens from Denmark, F-35 unaffordable. Switzerland deserves mention, initially selected Gripen, 2011, before voters rejected funding, 2014, later chose F-35, 2022, in second competition. But Swiss voters' initial preference proves Gripen's appeal even in wealthy nations, 7 countries. Combined value, if they'd chosen F-35, to $40 billion. That's why the resignation letter was submitted. That's why Lockheed Martin held emergency meeting. By the way, if you're learning how defense industry economics actually work behind closed doors, support the channel, like, and subscribe. The leaked internal memo that explains everything. Here's what most people don't know. In November 2023, Lockheed Martin's Strategic Planning Division circulated an internal memo assessing the Czech Republic decision's impact. The memo, portions leaked to Defense News, contained one sentence that explained the panic. Czech selection of Gripen validates cost-conscious procurement strategies that threaten F-35 positioning in 12 to 18 additional potential markets. Translation: Czech Republic didn't just cost us one sale. They proved to everyone else that choosing Gripen is legitimate, defensible, and won't damage relationships with Washington. The memo identified high-risk markets where Czech Republic's decision could influence procurement. Canada, 88 aircraft, $19 billion. Critical. Loss would validate European alternatives to Five Eyes partners. Poland, 70 plus additional aircraft beyond current 32 F-35s. Significant risk of split-buy strategy prioritizing cost over capability. Philippines, Indonesia, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, combined 150 plus aircraft. Cost constraints make Gripen competitive. Czech decision provides political cover. Total value at risk according to the memo, $50 to $70 billion over next decade. That's not losing sales. That's losing the export business model. Why the math keeps destroying F-35 sales. Now let me show you the cost comparison that keeps appearing in every country's procurement analysis, because this math is why dominoes keep falling. F-35, a combat-ready price, $110 million per aircraft, including engine, weapons integration, and initial support. Gripen E combat-ready price, $105 million per aircraft, including everything. Acquisition costs, nearly identical. But lifecycle costs, 40 years of operations, tell different story. 88 F-35's lifecycle cost, $77 billion total, Canada's official calculation. 88 Gripen's lifecycle cost, $32 billion total, Czech Republic's confirmed figure. Difference, $45 billion. Gripen costs 58% less over 40 years. Countries are asking, do we need $45 billion worth of additional capability? For most nations, the answer is no. Czech Republic's Air Force evaluation concluded, F-35 provides stealth and sensor fusion advantages. Gripen provides sufficient capability for Czech operational requirements at 58% lower lifecycle cost. Recommend Gripen. That reasoning is replicating across every cost-conscious procurement, and it's destroying Lockheed Martin's sales pipeline. The lobbying war. Lockheed Martin is losing. Here's how Lockheed Martin is fighting back, and why it's failing. Canada Maximum Pressure Campaign. Lockheed Martin lobbying expenditure in Canada, 2015 to 2024, $14.2 million documented. Strategy: mobilize 110 Canadian companies in F-35 supply chain, $1.9 billion annual revenue, 12,000 jobs. Message to politicians: choose Gripen and kill Canadian jobs. Counter-argument gaining traction. Those same workers could manufacture Gripen components with even greater Canadian control. Jobs don't disappear. They transfer from American to Canadian oversight. Result: lobbying increasingly ineffective as Canada's procurement review continues. Pentagon political pressure. U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen, 2023. We expect Canada to fulfill F-35 commitments. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin private meetings with Canadian ministers. F-35 demonstrates alliance commitment. But this pressure backfired. Canadian public and defense analysts responded, are we independent allies or American subsidiaries? Sovereignty concerns now strengthen Gripen's case rather than weaken it. Cost reduction claims. Lockheed Martin press releases constantly announce F-35 cost improvements. Per unit price now lowest ever. Maintenance costs declining. Reality: lifecycle costs for 88 aircraft remain $77 billion. Countries conducting independent analyses discover promotional claims don't match operational reality. Czech Republic's evaluation specifically noted Lockheed Martin projected costs differ significantly from actual operator experiences. The lobbying war is failing because the math is undeniable, and the Czech Republic decision proved choosing Gripen won't damage relationships. The Canada crisis. where everything breaks. Everything builds to one critical moment: Canada's fighter decision in 2026. Current status: government announced F-35 purchase in 2022. But since then, commissioned capability review, examining alternatives, including Gripen. Why is Canada reconsidering? 3 reasons. Arctic reality: Canada's primary defense mission is Arctic sovereignty. Previous scripts detailed how Gripen outperforms F-35 in Arctic conditions. Canadian defense planners now acknowledge F-35s. Arctic limitations create operational gaps. Cost pressure: $77 billion over 40 years consumes 5.5% of entire defense budget annually for 4 decades. That's money unavailable for icebreakers, submarines, Arctic surveillance, everything else defending sovereignty. Czech validation: NATO member chose Gripen. If Czech Republic, facing Russia directly, determined Gripen sufficient, why isn't it sufficient for Canada facing less intense threats? If Canada chooses Gripen, the dam breaks. Here's why. Canada is Five Eyes partner, NORAD member, closest U.S. military ally. If Canada rejects F-35, despite maximum Pentagon pressure, it signals to every ally that F-35 dependency creates unacceptable strategic risk. Australia would reconsider. Poland would reconsider. Every U.S. partner would ask, if Canada chose sovereignty over capability, should we? This is why Lockheed Martin and Pentagon are applying unprecedented pressure. This is why the lobbying is so expensive. This is why Ambassador makes public statements. Because Canada's decision doesn't just determine 88 aircraft, it determines whether the Gripen Domino effect becomes the F-35 export collapse. The nightmare scenario Lockheed Martin sees coming. Let me show you the timeline that keeps Lockheed Martin executives awake. 2026. Canada announces Gripen selection after 2-year review. $19 billion F-35 sale lost. International media headlines. Even Canada rejects F-35. 2027. Australia begins capability review, citing Arctic lessons from Canada. Considers high-low mix, limited F-35s for specialized missions, Gripens for routine patrols and homeland defense. $10 to $15 billion F-35 sales at risk. 2027. Poland announces split buy. Already ordered 32 F-35s, but needs 100+ fighters total. Decision: additional 70 fighters will be Gripens. Reasoning: reserve expensive F-35s for high-intensity NATO operations. Use affordable Gripens for homeland defense. $8 to $10 billion lost. 2028. Philippines, Indonesia, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria announce fighter selections. Pattern emerges. Budget-constrained countries choose Gripen. Only unlimited budget countries with absolute U.S. alignment choose F-35. Most countries fall into first category. Combined impact by 2030, $50 to $70 billion in lost F-35 export sales. Program effect: production volumes decline, per unit costs rise. F-35 becomes even less competitive. More countries choose alternatives. Death spiral accelerates. By 2035, F-35 becomes niche aircraft for U.S. forces and wealthiest allies. Gripen becomes standard fighter for cost-conscious NATO members and neutral nations. The F-35 export business model collapses entirely. This isn't speculation. This is the pattern already in motion. 7 countries have fallen. Canada is the 8th domino that triggers everything else. The truth Lockheed Martin won't admit. So here's the reality creating panic. Lockheed Martin built the F-35 export model on one assumption: that countries would pay premium prices for premium capability because no acceptable alternatives existed. That assumption is collapsing. 7 countries proved Gripen as acceptable alternative. More than acceptable, it's preferable for most nations' actual operational requirements, at half the cost. Czech Republic's decision was critical because it destroyed the anomaly excuse. NATO member facing Russia chose Gripen. That validates every cost-conscious country's doubts about F-35 value. Now the dominoes are accelerating. 9 years between Brazil and Czech Republic. 2 years between Czech Republic and Colombia. The next could fall in months. And everything hinges on Canada. If Canada, closest U.S. ally, NORAD partner, Five Eyes member, chooses Gripen despite maximum pressure, the message to every ally is clear. F-35 dependency creates strategic risk that outweighs capability advantages. The $4 billion panic isn't about Czech Republic. It's about the $50 to $70 billion that follows when Canada makes Czech Republic's choice look smart instead of risky. Lockheed Martin knows this. Pentagon knows this. That's why the pressure on Canada is more intense than any previous fighter competition. Because they're not fighting for 88 Canadian aircraft, they're fighting to prevent the entire export model from collapsing. 7 dominoes have fallen, the 8th is teetering, and Lockheed Martin can't stop it. Hit that like button and subscribe for updates when Canada announces its decision, because that choice determines whether the Gripen Domino effect becomes the F-35 export apocalypse. The panic is real. The resignation was real. The 7 countries are real. And the next domino is about to fall.